Morning,
Hey,
sir.
buddy.
Hey,
All right. So what are we doing this week?
we are finishing up Rule 8. We left it, we read through the first part up to the cyclic ebb and flow. So last week we covered the types of astral forces. And now we're into the cyclic ebb and flow. Well, this is the type of astral forces. But we read through the first few pages and left off. So we're on page 114 of the PDF, or page 242 in the blue book, with the subheading cyclic ebb and flow. Would you like me to get started?
Yes, sir. But last week we had that was super interesting, talking about the rays and how the rays are associated with these different aspects.
Right.
The first ray was the destroyer of souls. The second ray was the deluder of souls, and then the third ray was the manipulator of souls. If you don't break through that dweller aspect,
Right.
that's the dangerous part of not progressing. And then we kind of got into that towards the end. There was the problem of sex, and we're dominated
Sex attraction, right? And
money.
Differentiating the utility of it versus just the pleasure seeking of it.
Yeah. So now I think, we're on to this, and this is something that I know we've talked about in our lives, and we've both experienced this. The cyclic ebb and flow becomes very apparent once you start paying attention to yourself, right?
Right. No doubt.
Yeah.
All
one
right.
other thing. Well, yeah, one other thing that DK had said, I just want to say this real quick, was he said, what was that? Let reality govern my every thought, and truth be the master of my life. All right. So we need to start saying that more to each other, to ourselves. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So the cyclic ebb and flow. Let us consider now the words, the ebb and flow of the waters. In the understanding of the law of cycles, we gain knowledge of the underlying laws of evolution and come to a realization of the rhythmic work of creation. Incidentally, also we gain poise as we study our own life impulses, for they also have their ebb and flow and alternate between periods of light and periods of darkness. We have with us always that symbolic daily occurrence wherein the part of the world in which we live swings out into the clear light of the sun and later returns into the healing dark of the night. Our very familiarity with the phenomenon causes us to lose sight of its symbolic significance and to forget that under the great law, periods of light and dark, of good and evil, of submergence and emergence, of progress into illumination and apparent betrayal into darkness, characterize the growth of all forms, distinguish the development of races and nations, and constitute the problem of the aspirant who has built for himself a picture of walking in a constant illumined condition and of leaving all dark places behind.
I think we all kind of had that hope at some point.
Right.
And then you find out, oh, that's not necessarily the case,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
In these instructions, it is not possible for me to deal with the ebb and flow of the divine life as it manifests in the various kingdoms of nature and through the evolutionary growth of humanity, through experience and races, nations, and families. I seek, however, to elaborate somewhat the cyclic experience of a soul in incarnation, indicating the apparent ebb and flow of its unfoldment. The outstanding cycle for every soul is that of its forthgoing into incarnation and its return or flowing back into the center from whence it came. According to the point of view will be the understanding of this ebb and flow. Souls might esoterically be regarded as those seeking the light of experience, and therefore turn towards physical expression, and those seeking the light of understanding, and therefore retreating from the realm of human undertaking to forge their way inward into the soul consciousness, and so become dwellers in the light eternal. Without appreciating the significance of the terms, the psychologists have sensed these cycles and call certain types extroverts and others introverts. These mark an ebb and flow in individual experience and are the tiny life correspondences to the great soul cycles. This passing into and passing out of the web of incarnated existence are the major cycles of any individual soul, and a study of these types of pralaya dealt with in the Secret Doctrine and a treatise on cosmic fire would be found of real value by the student. There is also an ebb and flow in soul experience on any one plane, and this, in the early stages of development, will cover many lives. They are usually quite extreme in their expression. A study of the racial ebb and flow will make this clearer. In Lemurian days, the flow, or the outward going cycle, spent itself on the physical plane, and the ebb carried the life aspect right back to the soul itself, and there was no secondary ebb and flow on the astral or mental planes. Later, the tide broke on the shores of the astral plane, though including the physical in less degree. The flow directed its attention to the emotional life, and the drift back to the center took no account of the mental life at all. This was at its height for humanity in Atlantean days, and is true also of many today. Now the ebb and flow is increasingly inclusive, and the mental experience has its place so that all three aspects are swept by the life of the soul. All are included in the outgoing energy of the incarnating soul, and for many lives and series of lives, the cyclic force spends itself. Within the aspirant, there arises an understanding of what is going on, and he awakens to the desire to control consciously this ebb and flow, or, to put it in simple words, to turn the forces of the outgoing energy in any direction he chooses, or to withdraw to his center at will. He seeks to arrest this process of being swept out into incarnation without having any conscious purpose, and refuses to see the tide of his life beat out on emotional or mental spheres of existence, and then again see that life withdrawn without his conscious volition. He stands at the midway point and wants to control his own cycles, the ebb and flow as he himself may determine it. With conscious purpose, he longs to walk in the dark places of incarnated existence, and with equally conscious purpose, he seeks to withdraw into his own center. Hence, he becomes an aspirant.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You get tired of, just get tired, I guess, like it's just coming into our own and wanting to kind of take control over it, right?
Right.
A bit, as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense.
The life of the aspirant begins to repeat earlier cycles. He is assailed by a sudden stimulation of the physical nature and violently swept by ancient desires and lusts. This may be succeeded by a cycle wherein the physical body is conscious of the flowing away from it of vital energy and is devitalized because not the subject of attention. This accounts for much of the sickness and lack of vitality of many of our most cherished servers. The same process can affect the emotional body, and periods of exaltation and of highest aspiration alternate with periods of the deepest depression and lack of interest. The flow may pass on to the mental body and produce a cycle of intense mental activity. Constant study, much thought, keen investigation, and a steady intellectual urge will characterize the mind of the aspirant. To this may succeed a cycle wherein all study is distasteful, and the mind seems to lie entirely fallow and inert. It is an effort to think, and the futility of phases of thought assail the mind. The aspirant decides that to be is better far than to do. Can these dry bones live? He asks, and has no desire to see them revitalized.
Sounds like Paul, right?
Yeah. All truth, oh, excuse me. All truth seekers after truth are conscious of this unstable experience and frequently regard it as a sin or as a condition to be strenuously fought. Then is the time to appreciate that the midway spot, which is neither dry nor wet, must provide the standing place whereon his feet are set. This is a symbolic way of saying that he needs to realize two things. One, that states of feeling are quite immaterial and are no indication of the state of the soul. The aspirant must center himself in the soul consciousness, refuse to be influenced by the alternating conditions to which he seems subjected, and simply stand in spiritual being, and then, having done all, stand. 2, that the achievement of equilibrium is only possible when alternation has been the rule, and that the cyclic ebb and flow will continue just as long as the soul's attention fluctuates between one or other aspect of the form and the true spiritual man. The ideal is to achieve such a condition of conscious control that all will a man may be focused in. Okay, let me start that over. The ideal is to achieve such a condition of conscious control that at will a man may be focused in his soul consciousness or focused in his form aspect. Each act of focused attention being brought about through a realized and specific objective, necessitating such a focusing. Later, when the words of the great Christian teacher have significance, he will be able to say, whether in the body or out of the body, is a matter of no moment. The act of service to be rendered will determine the point where the self is concentrated, but it will be the same self, whether freed temporarily from the form consciousness or immersed in the form in order to function in different aspects of the divine whole. The spiritual man seeks for the furthering of the plan and to identify himself with the divine mind in nature. Withdrawing to the midway spot, he endeavors to realize his divinity, and then, having done so, he focuses himself in his mental form, which puts him en rapport with the universal mind. He endures limitation so that thereby he may know and serve. He seeks to reach the hearts of men and to carry to them inspiration from the depths of the heart of spiritual being. Again, he asserts the fact of his divinity, and then, through a temporary identification with his body of sensory perception, of feeling, and of emotion, he finds himself at one with the sensitive apparatus. He finds himself at one with the sensitive apparatus of divine manifestation, which carries the love of God to all forms on the physical plane.
That's beautiful.
It is.
That number 2 really stuck out to me. The achievement of equilibrium is only possible where alternation has been the rule. So that alternation is like this ebb and flow kind of coming together, right?
Yeah.
To create this new beingness type of so it's necessary.
Yeah. Well, I think that one really is important to recast out there too, because of feelings becoming immaterial and realizing that they're no indication of the state of the soul. Refusing to be influenced by the alternating conditions to which he seems subjected, and simply stand in spiritual being, and then, having done all, stand. So is that saying, well, I guess it's kind of saying that you got to let your feelings go, and your feelings really don't indicate for you this is what your soul is telling you to do, per se, maybe. Where I hear that out there a lot these days. I'm pursuing what my soul wants me to do because I have this feeling, This is what I should be doing. Might not be your soul telling you that.
No, man, so as I was going through part 2 of Rays and Initiations with Michael Robbins yesterday, he literally says that the soul has no interest in the personality at
Right.
all,
Right.
whatsoever, in any way.
Right.
So that should be food for contemplation there. And that's an illuminating, issue for us to really, ponder on.
Right.
That's the soul has no interest in the personality. Its only interest is I think he mentions is the group. So yeah, this is good stuff, man. It's deep.
All right. Again, he asserts the fact of his divinity, and then through identification with his body of sensory perception of feeling and of emotion, he finds himself at one with the sensitive apparatus of divine manifestation, which carries the love of God to all forms on the physical plane. Again, he seeks to aid in the materializing of the divine plan on the physical plane. He knows that all forms are the product of energy, rightly used and directed. With full knowledge of his divine sonship and a potent mind realization of all that that term conveys, he focuses his forces in the vital body and becomes a focal point for the transmission of divine energy, and hence a builder in union with the building energies of the cosmos. He carries the energy of illuminated thought and sanctified desire down into the body of ether, and so works with intelligent devotion. You ask for a clear definition of the midway spot. For the probationer, it is the emotional plane, the Kurukshetra, or the plane of illusion, where land, or physical nature, and water, or the emotional nature, meet. For the disciple, it is the mental plane, where form and soul make contact, and the great transition becomes possible. For the advanced disciple and the initiate, the midway spot is the causal body, the Karana Sarira, the spiritual body of the soul, standing as the intermediary between spirit and matter, life and form, the monad and the personality. This can also be discussed and understood in terms of the centers. As every student knows, there are two centers in the head. One center is between the eyebrows and has the pituitary body as its objective manifestation. The other is in the region at the top of the head and has the pineal gland as its concrete aspect. The pure mystic has his consciousness centered in the top of the head, almost entirely in the etheric body. The advanced worldly man is centered in the pituitary region. When through occult unfoldment and esoteric knowledge, the relation between the personality and the soul is established. There is a midway spot in the center of the head in the magnetic field, which is called the light in the head, and it is here that the aspirant takes his stand. This is the spot of vital import. It is neither land or physical, nor water or emotional. It might be regarded as the vital or etheric body, which has become the field of conscious service, of directed control, and of force utilization towards specific ends. Here, the magician takes his stand and through the medium of his force or energy body performs the magical creative work. One point is rather abstrusively dealt with in this rule, but it clarifies. The words are studied with care. At the close of the rule, we are told that when water, land, and air meet, there is the place for the working of magic. Curiously, in these phrases, the idea of location is omitted and only the time equation considered. Air is the symbol of the Buddhic vehicle, of the plane of spiritual love. And when the three above enumerated in their energy aspects meet, it is indicative of a focusing in the soul consciousness, and a centralization of the man in the spiritual body. From that point of power, outside of form, from the central sphere of unification, and from the focus point within that circle of consciousness, the spiritual man projects his consciousness into the midway spot within the brain cavity where the magical work must, in relation to the physical plane, be carried out. This ability to project the consciousness from the plane of soul realization into that of creative magical work on the etheric subplanes is gradually made possible as the student in his meditation work develops facility in focusing his attention in one or other of the centers in the body. This is accomplished through the medium of the forces of the four centers in the etheric body. He gradually gains that plasticity and that fluidity of the self-directed consciousness, which will enable him to play on the centers as a musician utilizes the 7 notes of music. When this has been achieved, he can begin to train himself in wider and more extended focusings, and must learn to withdraw his consciousness not only to the brain, but to the soul on its own plane, and thence redirect his energies in the performance of the magical work of the soul. The fundamental secret of the cycles lies in this withdrawal and the subsequent refocusing of attention, and it must be remembered in this connection that the basic law underlying all magical work is that energy follows thought. If aspirants would remember this, they would live through their periods of aridity with greater ease and would be conscious of the underlying purpose. It might here be asked, what are the dangers of this midway spot? The dangers of too violent fluctuation between land and water, or between the emotional response to life and truth or life on the physical plane. Some aspirants are too emotional in their reactions, others too materialistic. The effect of this is felt in the midway spot and produces a violent instability. This instability has a direct effect on the solar plexus center, which was the midway spot in the early Atlantean times, and is still the midway point in the transmutation processes of the aspiring personality. It transmutes and transmits the energies of the sacral center and of the center at the base of the spine, and is the clearinghouse for all energies focused in the centers below the diaphragm. The dangers incident to a premature and uncontrolled pouring in the pure spiritual energy to the mechanism of the personality. That vital spiritual force enters through the cranial aperture and pours into the head centers. From them will follow the line of least resistance, which is determined by the daily trend of the aspirant's thought life.
That's deep.
Yeah.
That's a good, that's something there. Energy follows thought too. So as that energy comes in, wherever your focus is, that's where it's really going, is what it sounds like, right?
Yeah. All right, where did I leave off?
Another and rather potent danger.
Okay. Another and rather potent danger is the result, literally, of the bringing together of the land and water. It demonstrates as the pouring into the brain consciousness, the land aspect, of the knowledges of the astral plane. One of the first things an aspirant becomes aware of is a tendency to the lower psychism. It is a reaction from the solar plexus center, but this midway point can be utilized as a jumping off place into the world of astral phenomena. This will produce death by drowning, for the aspirant's spiritual life can be swamped and entirely submerged in the interests of the lower physical experiences.
Psychical.
Thank you. Yeah, let me read that again. This will produce death by drowning, for the aspirant's spiritual life can be swamped and entirely submerged in the interests of the lower psychical experiences. It is here that many worthy aspirants go astray. Temporarily it may be, but the times are so critical that it is a matter to be deplored if any time is lost in futile experimentation and the retracing of any path chosen.
That's mentioned quite a bit in the books, you know, like there's
Yeah.
lots of little, you know, I guess you could call it gifts of the spirit or something that you, as we evolve, we have more sensitivity to some of the more subtle aspects of it, of things. And then, you know, that's where these mediums and psychics and kind of, we can get sidetracked. I
Yeah.
guess, you know?
Yeah. It wasn't there a little discussion about that in the first part of the rule that we read last week?
Well, likely. I mean, I think it's mentioned a number of times.
Yeah.
Because in each subplane, you know, there's other associated faculties of more subtlety, I guess, probably on the, I'm just gonna say this and I'm all right. So into the etheric subplanes, the first, second, third, and fourth etheric, I think that there's, you know, there's things that like psychic type of faculties that become enhanced,
Hmm.
and you can pick up on more because you're receptive to more on those on there. So, and then you can get, it sounds to me just like, you know, you could start to enjoy it or get sidetracked by the,
Well, essentially, you could drown in it. Is what it's saying.
yeah, that's not good.
No.
That can't be good.
So I guess be careful.
Yeah, stay the course.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. You know, because and he says, and retracing of any path chosen, deplored if any time is lost in futile experience, and the retracing of any path is chosen. So what he's saying there, and I think he said it in other books, we've all been a magician
Hmm.
in the past, right? When we were, you know, as we were coming up, we've all experienced these things before. So this isn't where our focus needs to be. We need to be on the mental plane.
Right.
We're not supposed to be messing around with astral
Well, no, and that's we talked about that a little bit just not too long ago, and that's the different phases of the races through the Lemurian age, which was basically the mastering of the physical, and leading into and then having some hints of crossover into the astral to then lead into the Atlantean age, which is the mastering of the astral, which then started having some little trickling ins, I guess, of the mental, but not really so much focus. I think that's what I said. We might have to go back to that when we're done.
Yeah.
But essentially, we've already been through those phases. And now we're at the point where we need to be focusing in on the mental.
Yeah,
to
don't
master
go
that
backwards.
tenure.
Don't.
Right, right.
That's involutionary behavior instead of, you know, and that's, you know, that reflects on the physical plane in terms of, you know, hanging on to, you know, past experiences and personality
Hmm.
traits, and you can just get stuck.
Right.
I mean, even like, what do you think about this, man? What, you know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going to the gym and working out,
Hmm.
but if that's your main focus, you're focused in on something that was, you know, handled a long time ago, right?
Right.
You're not even dealing on your emotional and desire nature right now. So it's essentially, you know, and Paul, I think even Paul even mentions that. He does mention that. He says something to the effect of exercise is all right for the physical body, but the working in the mind is what we need to do.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's a matter of I don't, and I could be wrong. I don't think
Stick
it's
to the
saying
evolutionary path.
right. But it's not saying so. We know we need to take care of our bodies. So there's a level of, exercise that people should be doing from a functionality, utility standpoint. But to become obsessed with it, and making that your like kind of center point of life is not where you should be headed.
Been there
And
though. We've all been there. We all
oh
did
yeah,
it.
definitely,
all-
definitely. And I'm not saying, it's not
Right.
intended to be a lecture for people that do
Right.
that, but it's just you need to understand what you're doing and why. And there's a difference between the utility function of something versus being obsessive with it, when you should be steering yourself to other direction. So I guess I'm going to stop talking before I trip up over myself, but don't let things consume you, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Now I lost my place again. Is it
A clue?
a clue? Okay, so yeah, after the retracing of any path chosen. So a clue to the significance of these words is to be found in the recognition of the following occult fact. The place where water and land meet is the solar plexus center. The place where water, land, and air meet is in the head. Land is a symbol of the physical plane life and of the exoteric form. Water is a symbol of the emotional nature. It is from the great center of the personality life, the solar plexus, that the life is usually ruled and governed and government administered. It is from the great center of the personality life, the solar plexus, that the life is usually ruled and government administered. When the center of direction lies below the diaphragm, there is no magic possible. The animal soul controls, and the spiritual soul is perforce quiescent. Air is the symbol of the higher life in which the Christ principle dominates, in which freedom is experienced and the soul comes to full expression. It is the symbol of the Buddhic plane, as water is of the emotional. When the life of the personality is carried up into heaven and the life of the soul comes down onto earth, there is the place of meeting. And there, the work of transcendental magic becomes possible. This meeting place is the place of fire, the plane of mind. Fire is the symbol of the intellect, and all magical work is an intelligent process carried out in the strength of the soul and by the use of the mind. To make itself felt on the physical plane, a brain is required which is receptive to higher impulses and which can be impressed by the soul utilizing the chitta, or mental substance, in order to create the needed thought forms and so express the ideas and purposes of the intelligent, loving soul. These are recognized by the brain and are photographed upon the vital airs found in the brain cavity. When these vital airs can be sensed by the magician in meditation, and the thought forms imprinted on this miniature reflection of the astral light, then the real potency and magic can begin to make itself felt. The brain has heard occultly the injunctions and instructions of the mind as it relays the behests of the soul. The vital airs are swept into form-making activity, just as their higher correspondents, the modifications of the thinking principle, the mind stuff, as Pantageli calls it, are thrown into an analogous form-making activity. These can then be seen interiorly by the man who is seeking to perform the magical work, and much of his success is dependent upon his ability to register impressions exactly and to see with clarity the forms of the process in magic, which he is seeking to demonstrate as magical work in the outer world. It might therefore be said that there are three stages in the form-making process. First, the soul or spiritual man, centered in the soul consciousness and functioning in the secret place of the Most High, visualizes the work to be done. This is not a sequential act, but the finished, completed work of magic is visioned by a process that does not involve the time element or spatial concepts at all. Secondly, the mind responds to the soul, calling attention to the work to be performed, and is swept into thought form making activity by this impression. According to the lucidity and illumination of the mind stuff, so will be the response to the impression. If the mind is a true reflector and receiver of soul impress, the corresponding thought form will be true to its prototype. If it is not true, as is usually the case in the early stages of the work, then the thought form created will be distorted and incorrect, unbalanced, and out of drawing. It is
That's sorry, man. That's
no, go for it.
It's usually the case in the early stages, and this is why we wonder why what we're working on didn't come into didn't take shape on the physical plane, because it'll be distorted. We didn't let it go. We didn't properly do the work as it needs done. Essentially, we didn't. We're still kind of testing it out. It's kind of just like learning, I guess. I'm assuming we're learning how to do this. So, what we try to create doesn't necessarily come through properly. It's out of drawing.
I'm just reading back over it. If the mind is a true reflector and receiver of soul impress, the corresponding thought form will be true to its prototype. If it is not true, which is the case in early stages, the thought form created will be distorted and incorrect, unbalanced, and out of drawing. Yeah, so I think it goes back to what you were saying. It almost seems that it's expected. Well, I mean, that explains a lot, maybe. Why maybe as you begin along the path, you question a lot of things. I don't know.
Well, you're not picking up yet what the right true reflections yet from the soul. You're probably getting, pieces of something and then translating it through your personality, maybe, or through,
Right.
And then you're kind of doing what you want with what you received, but that's not the way it was intended.
Well, and then
so kind of like what we were talking about earlier.
Well, I was just gonna say, when we start and we're having these individual revelations and we want to go and tell the whole world about it, but maybe we need to rethink that before you do it, because these thought forms aren't fully developed yet, and they're not really a true reflection of the receiver of the soul. And as such, you could just be spouting out more hogwash that we see a lot of people do. But I think the comfort there is knowing that if you're doing that, you're at the early stages of this process, which means you are on the right path. Now you just need to keep maintenance forward and developing those thought forms and I guess staying with the light and being a true reflector of the soul impress. So it takes work to get there.
Oh, it's an ebb and flow.
Yep.
It's necessary.
And you'll beat yourself up a lot along the way.
Certainly.
So, all right. It is in meditation that this work of accurate reception and correct building is learnt, and hence the emphasis laid in all true schools of esoteric training upon a focused mind, a capacity to visualize, an ability to build thought forms, and an accurate grasp of egoic intent. Hence, also the need of the magician beginning the practical work of magic with himself as the subject of the magical experiment. Excuse me. He begins to grasp the vision of the spiritual man as he is in essence. He realizes the virtues and reactions which that spiritual man would evidence in physical plane life. He builds a thought form of himself as the ideal man, the true server, the perfect master. He gradually coordinates his forces so that power to be these things in external reality begins to take shape so that all men can see. He creates a pattern in his mind, which hews as true as he can make it to the prototype, and which serves to model the lower man and force conformity to the ideal. As he perfects his technique, he finds a transforming power at work upon the energies which constitute his lower nature, until all is subordinated and he becomes, in practical manifestation, what he is esoterically and essentially. And this takes place, as this takes place, he begins to be interested in the magical work in which it is the function of all true souls to participate. Then, the third aspect of the form-making process can manifest. The brain is synchronized with the mind, and the mind with the soul, and the plan is sensed. The vital airs in the head can be modified and respond to the force of the building magical work. A thought form exists then as the result of the previous two activities, but it exists in the place of the brain activity and becomes a focusing center for the soul, and a point through which energy can flow for the performance of the magical work. This magical work, carried out under the direction of the soul, inspiring the mind, which in its turn impresses the brain, leads then, as a result of this triple coordinated activity, to the creation of a focusing center or form within the head of the magician. The energy which flows through this focal point acts through three distributing agents, and hence all three are involved in all magical work. One, the right eye, through which the vital energy of the spirit can express itself. Two, the throat center, through which the word, the second aspect, or the soul, expresses itself. Three, the hands, through which the creative energy of the third aspect works. Excuse me. The white magician works with the eyes open, the voice proclaiming, and the heads conferring. These points are, or technical interests, excuse me. These points are, or technical interest to the experienced worker in magic, but of symbolic interests only to the aspirants for whom these letters are intended. That the inner vision may be ours, the eye see clearly the glory of the Lord, and the voice speak only in benediction, and the hands be used only in helpfulness, may well be the prayer of each of us.
Well, that pretty much says it all right there.
Right.
Right. You know, the throat, it's a, I think it's mentioned that the right eye goes to the Buddhic plane and the left eye goes to the mental plane. And that's part of the reason why it's important to actually read the words instead of just hearing them.
Right.
Right. So that's why it's good to pick up a book or, you know, or follow along. And the throat, have you ever tried to go like, I don't know how to say this, but I've meditated on the throat, you know, and if you, as you're thinking to yourself, your thoughts, even inside of our even if they're not verbally coming out, it appears this is where they're at. If you follow your thoughts, you can trace them down, and whether they come out of here or not is another thing. But this is where, when you're thinking and you're thinking to yourself, this is generally where they're at. And then, you know, to be able to quiet that and shut those thoughts off is, I think, comes potentially after a lot, you know, meditating on that and finding that that's where they're at. And if you can go there, you can kind of halt the chatter from that place. And it kind of opens up that plane of thought, I want to say. Like it opens it up to be cleared out, to leave it empty. And yeah, it's very deep. I've had some really interesting meditations on the throat. But that's kind of where you can control the thought, the thoughts. I want to say that in my experience, that's just my own personal 2 cents in my experience.
So I'll say that I haven't tried that. But I've never really.
See whether you're see if you can think what you're going to say, but don't say it, and it's in the same spot.
Because I've always felt like the thoughts are coming from up here, or have felt, but I've never really meditated like a focus in the throat. So I don't know. I'll have to give it a shot.
Just think, just for 1 second though, think of what you're going to say to me next, and don't say it, but see where that's at. Where do you find it in the same place as the words are coming from?
Yeah.
So,
because it's like it wants to say it, but I'm not going to let it.
Well, where did it? And it's there. That's where it originates. And look, the throat center, which through which the word, the second aspect, or the soul expresses itself.
Huh.
Now, you know, it's a very interesting thing. I've never talked to anybody about that in that way. So, but that's where the thunder roars or something like, and it can also be very quiet. And that's where you can kind of shut it all down if you can get your focus to that point. You don't have to let the words come up necessarily, or the thoughts arise from that. The normal stuff. Yeah. So there's something I've been kind of thinking about this a lot lately, but this is like our computer system, or I want to say like this, our, it's operating system, And as DK goes through this and he explains what, you got the 1,000 petal lotus, or up here, and this is kind of receiving from above, right?
Right.
And you've got this is functioning of the soul and we're making that connection, and then we make that connection and it kind of goes down to the heart. If we're operating up here, and then in here is where we're nobody said we're thinking up here. We're receiving more or less, right? And then translating and then into words. I don't know. This is something I've been, spending some time just thinking on. But yeah, it makes for certainly interesting contemplation.
Well, I was just gonna say it's something I'll put some work into, because I sometimes find difficulty. I almost always find difficulty in kind of silencing it all, as it's all brewing, and maybe it's because I've been laying too much focus trying to get it under control up there, versus looking in these other centers.
Well, in the heart, if we're speaking from heart to heart, it's not all, it's different activities taking place along here. There's different functions, right? Magic work carried out under the direction of the soul, inspiring the mind, which in its turn impresses the brain. Leads then to the creation of a focusing center or form within the head. The energy which flows through this focal point acts through 3 distributing agents, and hence all 3 are involved. So it's all happening, at the same time, essentially, right? Just like the body, the body, emotions, and the mind are all working together. The lower 3 are working together. This is all working together. Yeah, they're of technical interest.
Just going back into the rule where it talked a little bit about the head and the 2 head centers again. And I think that kind of helps clarify it a bit, because yeah, it says here, pure mystic has his consciousness centered in the top of the head, most entirely in the etheric body. The advanced worldly man is centered in the pituitary region. When through occult unfoldment, esoteric knowledge, the relation between the personality and the soul is established there, is the midway spot in the center of the head in the magnetic field, which is called the light in the head. And it is here that the aspirant takes his stand. This is the spot of vital import. So there's your receiving activity, right? It is neither land nor physical, nor water or emotional. It might be regarded as the vital or etheric body, which has become the field of conscious service, of directed control, and of forced utilization towards specific ends.
So my point would be is, if you can go into your throat, that's where you can shut off a lot of the chit chat.
Right. And all I'm saying is I've never really picked up on that before, and I've been trying to use my head centers to get that all under control, and it hasn't ever worked. And this is probably why, because the head centers, well, it says right here that you're receiving it there and you're storing it there, and you're using it to direct it.
Even so, when even when you meditate, right, we don't have to say the Om out loud,
right?
But we're saying that through the throat anyway,
right?
So we have to kind of, I don't say we don't have to, but we should recognize that what we're kind of internalizing is happening there. And that's subject to transmission, I guess, and to be received by anybody that can pick up on this stuff, essentially. So this is, and that'd be where we can kind of control it from, like our, we can protect ourselves from the throat, more or less, kind of.
That's where the soul, okay, so soul expression comes from the throat. Through which the word, the second aspect, or the soul, expresses itself.
Well, the soul, in this case, the soul would be expressing itself when it's conducting this, this work. But who's expressing is, that's also where the personality can get chit chat going pretty quickly. Nonsensical, lower personality.
Right,
chit-chat.
gotcha, yeah.
But that's part of the transference of the energies that take place in there as well. Because if you're operating, I assume if you're operating from the solar plexus and in the lower three, then that's just, you're just going to have chit chat.
Right. Anything
all
below the diaphragm is kind of pulling us back down to the lower two.
But it's also expressed through there anyway. It's expressed through there too.
Right.
So this is the point of verbal word expression. So I guess it can either be, it can be coming from the lower
or the higher
personality,
yeah.
or be coming from the soul when you're expressing properly. Or yeah. And then it should be, the words should be much more appropriate to and intelligently used.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So there's some hints, I think, in that as to what, what interactions. With others.
So it's almost like the throat might be looked at as the final stopgap before you let yourself get tripped up on
it can be
what you're expressing, right? But you need to get it under control in order to.
It's funny. I think Rumi has in one of his poems, he says, put a lock on it. Put a lock on the throat, throw it away or something. It's have to look it up. But this is something at our stage of the game. This is something that we're just starting to learn.
Right. Lots to think about here.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
it's great stuff. Lots of meditation involved in this stuff, And you start to see why meditation is, or contemplation is so, becomes so important, because
very important. Yeah.
You have to be able to synthesize, these things have to get synthesized, and you have to invoke that
right.
Synthesis, or so we get we get it synthesized and assimilated to make sense.
Well, and I think you made a good point earlier about reading the words versus just listening. because that helps further internalize and synthesize the information. But beyond that, it's more than just kind of reading the words too, because you do have to go back and contemplate. Not sure, I'm sure there's people out there that can read through this and maybe not need to contemplate as much because maybe they've taken this in a previous lifetime and they're just kind of doing a refresh to get them up to speed. But all of this, yeah, you've got to fully synthesize it. You can't just listen to it. You got to read it. And you need
Oh,
to
this is a
contemplate
life
it.
work. This is life work. This is not something to be played around with.
Right.
And in fact, it's even said in many places that it's dangerous. And there are ways, and DK talks about the types of yoga that are supposed to be done at the different stages. Right? Like hatha yoga is for the body, and it does, these things do stimulate, get things moving. But that's not where you want the energy. That's not where you want it going. You don't want to stimulate the lower chakras more.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense now when we study this. You don't want that. That's, so you got a lot of people doing hatha yoga, and they could potentially be doing themselves more harm than good.
In terms of keeping themselves from advancing forward, because they're relying on practices probably of the past that had its place and purpose.
It had its, it did.
At some
It
point.
certainly did when it was time for that sort of growth. But, we're trying to get out of the body consciousness, not into it.
Right.
Spend enough time in it. Right. So then, then there's Raja yoga is appropriate, I think, is what he says for the most appropriate for us reading these books. And that's royal yoga. And, that's probably lots of meditation and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, we don't want to be stimulating these things where we get all messed up and get unbalanced.
Right.
I've certainly been unbalanced, sir. I've had plenty of my personal experience being unbalanced at times, and I can luckily I can recognize it. Now, because when you get an influx of energy, where it goes and energy follows thought, man, your life can be flipped upside down. If you're worried about physical plane stuff more than you are, if you're focused there more than we're focused on our soul, soul work, turn into a hot mess.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. Yeah. All sorts of crazy stuff can start to happen externally, as opposed to doing the internal work. And it's deep. This is really beautiful stuff, though, that we have this available so we can get to know ourselves in such deep ways. I thought Rule 9 is also pretty short, I believe.
Yeah, we should probably be able to get through that next week, I think.
But Rule 10 is
long. Yeah. But Rule 9 coming up next week. That's a good one too. I did a read ahead last week. It's all about purification. So that'd be a good one.
And I'm sure he says that we focus our purification way too much on the physical plane. Physical,
probably read it, but probably
yeah. We do too much. We focus too much on the physical, and we're kind of avoid the emotional and mental.
Right.
totally normal.
It's a part
but
of it,
Nevertheless,
much
a
more.
hindrance.
right?
Yeah, nevertheless, a hindrance.
Yeah, because there's, yeah, definitely a lot that goes into purification other than just the body. So that'll be a good one.
Yeah, very good. Okay, sir. What do you want to
All
do? You
right.
want to call it there?
Yeah, I don't think we should break into Rule 9
No. Okay,
Not
that sounds
today.
good. I'm gonna shut this off. All right, see you next week.
Sounds good. See ya.